You don't just walk away on a whim. You detach slowly, painfully, and only after giving more chances than you should have. To most people, it looks sudden. One day, you're warm, supportive, emotionally present, and the next, you're distant, unreadable, gone. But the truth is, your heart started checking out long before you physically left. You noticed the shift in energy, the words left unsaid, the emotional disconnect, and you tried to fix it. You held on, gave grace, hoped they would meet you where you were. But when nothing changed, something inside you did. Detachment isn't revenge. It's not a game. It's protection. It's you realizing that being emotionally available to the wrong person is slowly killing your spirit. And once that realization hits, it's over. Not because you stopped caring, but because you cared too much for too long. This video is for the INFJ who's been called cold, distant, or heartless, simply for choosing to protect what's left of their soul. You held on longer than most would understand. Even after the connection started to fade, even when the other person grew distant or distracted, you stayed emotionally open, hoping, believing, trying. That's what INFJ do. You don't give up at the first sign of disconnection. Instead, you lean in. You ask deeper questions. You offer more understanding. You search for the moment when things shifted, wondering what you could do to bring the closeness back. And the hardest part? You don't let them see how much it hurts. You keep showing up, emotionally present, patient, giving, while quietly feeling the ache of being unseen. It's not desperation, it's love. It's the INFJ instinct to nurture, to protect what once felt real. You remember the connection at its best and you fight to preserve it, even when you're the only one fighting. But over time, something shifts. Not all at once. It's subtle. You start to share less. You begin holding your thoughts closer. And eventually, your emotional door begins to close. Not out of anger, but from repeated disappointment. It's not because you stopped caring, it's because you realized you were the only one who still did. And that realization is what starts the quiet, final detachment. They never yelled, they never made scenes, they just forgave. Quietly, repeatedly. INFJ have this deeply ingrained pattern of offering grace long before anyone even realizes they've been hurt. When someone they care about messes up, they don't rush to punish or expose the pain. Instead, they sit with it. They rationalize, empathize, and try to understand the why behind the hurtful action. They give second chances without being asked, third chances even. They make peace in their own mind long before the other person ever acknowledges that peace was broken. And while that might sound noble, it's also heavy, emotionally exhausting, because every time they forgive without an apology, a part of them quietly breaks. A part of them learns that their pain doesn't matter enough to be noticed, that the effort they put into healing others doesn't always come back to them. And the more they let it go, the more they carry until one day they simply stop. Not out of anger, but out of depletion. The tank is empty. They don't explode or demand closure. They just detach. They emotionally step away, often while still smiling, and the people around them rarely understand what happened because they never saw the silent wounds building up. INFJ don't keep score, but they do reach a limit, and when that limit is reached, it's not loud. It's final. They gave grace not to be walked on, but because they hoped someone would eventually care enough to see the effort. But when no one does, they learn to care for themselves instead. There comes a moment when the INFJ just stops talking. Not because they don't care, but because they've finally realized their words aren't landing where they need to. For a long time, they tried to explain how they felt, why they were hurt, what they needed. They opened up, even when it was hard. They gave people access to the most vulnerable parts of themselves, hoping that if they just communicated clearly enough, someone would understand. But instead of connection, they were often met with defensiveness, dismissal, or silence. And after a while, that starts to feel like shouting into a void. Every conversation feels one-sided. Every emotional truth feels like a burden. And so they begin to pull back, not in anger, but in quiet resignation. They tell themselves, maybe I'm too much, maybe I expect too much, maybe I should just keep it in. And that's when things start to change. They stop expressing, they stop clarifying, they stop hoping the other person will finally get it. And from the outside, it may look like they're fine. They still smile, they still listen, but inside, they've already detached, because if someone can't meet them with effort and empathy, what's the point of constantly pouring themselves out? The INFJ doesn't want to feel like a problem to be solved. They just want to be seen without having to fight for it. And when that doesn't happen, they retreat inward. They protect their peace in silence. And by the time anyone notices they've gone quiet, it's often already too late. INFJ don't just fall for people, they fall for potential, for the quiet beauty they sense beneath someone's wounds, for the way someone could love if only they healed, if only they opened up, if only they tried. That's the part that hooks them, the glimpses, the soft moments, the deep conversations, the rare times when someone lets their guard down and shows who they could truly become. INFJ hold on to that version. They stay loyal to it, committed to helping the person grow into what they see, what others often overlook. But over time, reality begins to wear through the hope. Patterns repeat. Apologies don't lead to change. Promises fade into the same old wounds. And even then, INFJ keep holding on. They tell themselves to be patient, to be compassionate, to believe in the process. But the truth is, loyalty to potential can become a trap. Because while the INFJ is loving the future version of someone, the present version is slowly draining them. They overlook the red flags, they minimize their own needs, they stay emotionally invested long after the relationship stops feeling mutual. And it hurts, because when they finally see the gap between what could be and what is, they're forced to confront a painful truth. Love alone isn't enough to change someone. You can't build a future on maybe. And when INFJ realize they've been loving a version of someone who never consistently showed up, that's when the detachment begins, not with anger, but with grief, quiet grief for what could have been, and acceptance of what actually is. There's a specific kind of loneliness that hits different. It's not the loneliness of being by yourself. It's the loneliness of being with someone and still feeling invisible. INFJ know that feeling all too well. They show up fully. They listen deeply. They open their heart. And yet, somehow, they feel like they're talking into a void. Like their presence is more of a background feature than something that's truly seen or felt. They sit across from the person they care about, and instead of connection, they feel distance. They ask how the other person is doing, offer support, offer love, but no one thinks to ask how they're doing. Their emotional world goes unnoticed, their depth gets dismissed, and the longer that goes on, the more the INFJ starts to disappear. Not physically, but emotionally. They stop sharing, stop opening up, because what's the point of vulnerability when it feels like no one's listening? The worst part, they blame themselves. They wonder if they're too needy, too sensitive, too complicated, but deep down, they know the truth. They're just with someone who doesn't see them. And that kind of disconnection is far more painful than solitude, because when an INFJ is alone, they can breathe, they can recharge. But when they're alone with someone, it chips away at their spirit. It makes them feel like a ghost in their own relationship. Eventually, that emotional starvation becomes too much. It's not a dramatic ending, it's not a sudden goodbye, it's a slow detachment, one that begins the moment they realize they feel lonelier with this person than they ever did without them. And once they reach that point, there's no going back, because INFJs don't need a partner to fill space. They need a partner who truly sees them. And if they can't find that, they'll choose peace over presence every time. Any INFJ don't walk away in a storm of anger or chaos. They don't slam doors or scream. They don't make scenes. When they detach, it's quiet, gradual, almost unnoticeable at first. But behind that slow fade is something deeper than frustration. It's exhaustion. Not the kind that sleep can fix, but the kind that comes from loving too deeply for too long without being met with the same energy. You gave chances, so many of them. You tried to explain, to fix, to hold space. You hoped they'd notice the effort, the emotional labor, the pain behind your smile, but they didn't. So, piece by piece, you began to pull back, not because you stopped caring, but because you had nothing left to give. It wasn't about revenge or teaching someone a lesson. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about survival, emotional survival. Because INFJ don't detach suddenly, they endure. They give benefit of the doubt. They overthink. They reflect. They wonder if they're the problem. And even when the relationship feels one-sided, they keep pouring in until the well runs dry, until giving starts to feel like self-abandonment. That's when something shifts. Not with shouting, but with silence. You stop texting first. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to make the other person see what they refuse to see. And by the time anyone notices, you're already gone emotionally. The version of you that cared so deeply, they were slowly eroded by neglect, dismissal, and unmet needs. You didn't leave because you wanted to hurt them. You left because staying was hurting you. And the saddest part is they'll probably tell people you just changed or gave up, but you know the truth. You stayed long after you should have left. And when you finally let go, it wasn't out of bitterness. It was out of sheer, silent exhaustion. When an INFJ finally walks away from a relationship, it's not a sudden decision. It's not impulsive or dramatic or fueled by anger. It's the result of countless internal conversations, silent grieving done long before a single word is spoken. You left emotionally before you ever left physically. You tried to hold on. You replayed moments in your mind, searching for what could be fixed, what could be salvaged. You sat in silence next to someone you once felt everything with, wondering when the connection faded, or if it was ever really there to begin with. But instead of exploding outward, the sadness sank inward. You didn't argue, you didn't beg, you simply began to let go, quietly. And the FJ are emotional processors. You don't just feel your own pain, you feel the weight of others' emotions too. That's why you stayed so long. You hoped, you analyzed, you forgave things that went unacknowledged. You adjusted your expectations, softened your boundaries, convinced yourself things would improve. But as time passed and nothing changed, you started grieving the loss of a connection that still technically existed. You mourned the version of them you once believed in. You cried in silence after conversations where you felt invisible. You smiled while your heart cracked. And slowly, something in you shifted. By the time you physically walk away, you're already gone inside. The tears have already been cried. The memories have already been sorted, boxed up in your mind. You've said goodbye in your heart long before the actual goodbye. And that's what most people don't see. They think INFJ leave too quietly, too easily, but they never see the quiet devastation that came before. The sleepless nights, the inner turmoil, the hope that slowly died. So when you finally walk away, it's not an escape, it's a release. A quiet act of self-respect after caring too much for too long. And even if they don't understand why you left, you know. You left because staying meant losing yourself. When an INFJ detaches, it's not a temporary mood or a silent protest. It's a quiet decision that's already been made in the heart. By the time they walk away, the door has already closed. And it's not out of spite. It's not a game. It's because they've already given all the chances. They stayed long past the breaking point. They explained, they forgave, they hoped. But when that last thread of emotional connection snaps, it's not dramatic, it's final. Not with bitterness, but with peace. A deep, tired, soul-level peace that says, I did everything I could. INFJ don't cut people off easily. In fact, they're some of the most patient hearts you'll ever know. They believe in growth, redemption, and second chances, sometimes too much. That's why their detachment is so profound when it finally happens. They didn't leave quickly. They stayed through confusion, disappointment, silence, and emotional disconnect. They tried to understand the other person even when they felt misunderstood. They held space for the relationship even when it stopped holding them. So when they finally stop trying, it's because they've already exhausted every part of themselves. And no, they don't come back. Not because they're unforgiving, but because going back would mean betraying themselves. Reopening that door would mean ignoring their own intuition, the same intuition that begged them to stop hurting, to stop hoping for something that was never coming. And INFJ don't do that. Once they've made peace with the ending, they walk away gently, but completely. No final confrontation, no dramatic speech, just quiet acceptance and a closed door that won't open again. That's what most people don't understand. They think INFJ are cold for never returning, for cutting ties so cleanly. But what they don't see is the storm that came before, the effort, the emotion, the silent breaking. The INFJ didn't give up easily. They gave everything and then finally gave themselves permission to stop. If this felt like your story, if you've ever loved deeply, stayed too long, and left quietly, just know you're not alone. INFJ love hard, but when they let go, it's with a heavy heart and a clear soul. If you felt understood here, subscribe. This space is for those who feel deeply and walk quietly. And in case no one told you lately, you were right to choose peace.